Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and Merry Christmas, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service in Alaska, and it is the 25th of December, and we are quickly wrapping up this year and this month, and it is finally starting to look like winter across many parts of the west and the south, with more snow falling in southeast. We'll check those warnings here in just a minute. First, you can always get your latest weather information anytime by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391, and find us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube during the day. Of course, in the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing. We encourage you to check that out. You can subscribe to that on YouTube as well. NWS Anchorage would be the place to find that. Simply go to youtube.com and you can go in the search bar, type in AKwx TV. You'll find that afternoon briefing, and you'll find the listing for this show, which is always on a little bit later on in the evening. You can get the complete forecast there. And of course, you'll be able to scroll along to the part that you want to watch the most, or perhaps you want to watch again. It's that kind of show. Here's a look at the snow forecast there. As we look at southeastern Alaska, it is going to snow. And as we get into the evening and overnight hours, that snow should start to pick up, especially around Yakutat and points northward across the northern inner channels around the Juneau and Haynesboro regions there. Some of those snow amounts could range anywhere from 3 to 6 inches, mainly along the inner channels there, and perhaps even higher, up around 5 to 8 inches, a little bit further north toward Yakutat. So expect a little more snow as you wake up tomorrow morning, and winter storm warnings and advisories are posted for a large part of the Panhandle. Not everybody, but quite a few places there. Again, for many of the inner channels, you're looking at a winter weather advisory that'll take you into tomorrow afternoon. Those amounts, again, about 3 to 6 inches for most places. Now, once you get into Juneau, winter storm warnings are in effect there. You're looking at a little bit more snow all the way up toward Yakutat as well, about 5 to 8 inches there. And for many locations around the Juneau region, you could be looking at a good half foot or more. So about 5 to 10 inches around Juneau and the Haines area. Those winter storm warnings will take you into about 7 o'clock tomorrow night. So plan on it snowing in the capital city, and for most in southeast. Some of the outer coasts there may not be looking at nearly as much snow, but for our friends watching in Hyder and around the Misty Fjords today and tomorrow, you're going to be looking at a good 10 to 15 inches of snow potentially in some of the higher terrain there in the Misty Fjords. So exciting stuff, a nice taste of winter there in southeast. Hopefully you're prepared for it. Now would be a good time to maybe know where everything is outside, so in case it's about to get covered up. Now across the western parts of Prince William Sound, mainly around the Portage Pass and the Resurrection Valley northward, you're looking at snow in some of the higher terrain. Moose Pass to the Turnagain Pass area toward Girdwood. There's a decent possibility you're going to get upwards of 13 to 16 inches of snow. Winter storm warnings posted there. That combined with wind could make it a little bit tough to travel over the next 24 hours. So be advised of that. And if you're heading through the Portage Valley and into Girdwood, perhaps some much needed snow in that area. Again, but always check out the avalanche conditions. You can do that anytime through the Alaska Avalanche Information Center, the Hatcher Pass Avalanche Information Center, as well as areas southward there. Always a good idea to know the conditions before you go out, especially if there is fresh snow and snow that's capable of sliding. So know before you go, and that certainly applies to avalanche conditions as well. Looking northward, looks like winter weather advisories there wind advisories posted for some of the northern Alaska range and the Deltana and Tanana Flats region. Some gusty conditions will continue through the evening there. Northward, it is wind chill advisories all the way for the western parts of the North Slope from Point Hope toward Wainwright and Barrow, Prudhoe Bay, and Kaktovik. With a little bit of wind moving around, it could feel like it's 55 below at some points through tonight and into tomorrow. So make sure that you're prepared for even stronger, more bitter cold there as we get into the overnight hours, and again tomorrow with a little bit of a breeze. 55 below at its worst right now is what we're expecting there. Out across the western parts of the Seward Peninsula, all around Norton Sound, winter storm warnings posted for you. Expecting again some accumulating snow and high winds a little bit further to the south of that. It looks like we're looking around 3 inches of snow for some parts of the northern Yukon Delta there. It looks like that combined with some stronger winds, gusts up toward 65 miles per hour, could create some poor visibility at times. So that with wind and falling snow across the west. Again, warnings and advisories for the lower and middle Yukon valleys as we go into tonight and tomorrow. So quite a bit going around in the north and the west and certainly in southeast. A fair dose of winter coming your way. Here's a look at that wind chill forecast up north, and this is taking us through the next 2 days all the way through December. So this is showing us the worst of the next couple days. So how cold could it feel during that time frame? Anywhere from 47 below in Barrow to 56 below around Prudhoe Bay to 58 below around Arctic Village, and not quite as bad the further west you go, but this is where the deep cold is already. And then where the wind starts to move across that, that's again how cold it could feel. So all in all, wind chill advisories are posted for the North Slope for the most part, and for some parts of the northern coastal plain for values close to 55 below as we head into tonight and again for most of the daytime tomorrow. So be prepared for big cold. Here's a look at where it's coming from. Low pressure once again moving through the Bering, and this is actually starting to back up or reverse course back towards St. Paul and St. George and the Pribilofs. This fetch of moisture is what's going to bring the snow to southeast. Enjoyed most of the day under relatively dry conditions. That will be ending fairly shortly if it hasn't already for areas in the north and the northern inner channels, including Juneau and Haines. Up north, though, it's high pressure. It's in command of the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, and that is feeding into this giant vacuum that you see across the Bering. And as it does that, it's moving enough wind across the North Slope to make that cold air feel even colder. That's your wind chill advisory. On the leading edge of this, places like Shaktoolik today saw some interesting clouds. Hopefully you got to see those. They look like cow udders. If you've ever seen really severe weather across the southern plains, those dangling clouds drooping down, they look kind of strange. Those are mammatus clouds, and they sound like what they sound like. They certainly look like cow udders hanging down from the sky, and usually it's a sign of unstable air. Not necessarily severe thunderstorms, but in Shaktoolik, for a point today looking out toward the west, we saw mammatus clouds, and they're very interesting. They mean there's a lot of air moving up, but there's also an equal amount of air trying to move down, and that unstable atmosphere can make those very interesting kind of teardrop shapes dropping out of that cloud base. So hopefully you got a chance to see that. As you look across the eastern Gulf, all of this moisture is wrapping into places like Shaktoolik and the Yukon, as well as the eastern parts of Norton Sound, creating wind, creating unstable weather, and creating some snow there. Again, 3 inches of snow or more across the lower Yukon Valley and into the interior. It's mainly going to be wind for the Alaska Range, cold for the north, and a decent amount of snow. Get your snow blowers ready for parts of southeast. And clouds and wind will continue for the Alaska Range and the western Gulf there as clouds continue to build in from the south, wrapping around low pressure. That's about 951 low earlier this afternoon, just inside of the Bristol Bay region and to the west between St. Paul, St. George, and most of the Alaska Peninsula. Out ahead of that, an occluded front moving northward into south central and the Kenai Peninsula, another boundary sitting right across southeastern Alaska. High pressure across the Northwest Territories and reports of blowing snow up across the north. As we go into tonight, that frontal boundary will start to creep up into southeast. With that, we expect rain and snow to fall. The snow should pick up in earnest around Juneau and Haines all the way toward Yakutat. Periods of rain and snow around Cook Inlet. Not expecting a whole lot of snow around the Anchorage area or south central. Too much wind moving over the mountains. Doesn't look like it's going to produce a whole lot more than snow showers there. A little bit further west, not the case around Norton Sound. Look for periods of snow and blowing snow there. Mainly blowing snow up north, and again cold. Low pressures down to 958, and another wave coming in from the west. All of this will produce rain for parts of Kodiak Island and the western Gulf as we head into Saturday. Periods of rain and snow for southwestern Alaska. Rain and snow showers possible for the western Kenai Peninsula. The eastern Kenai Peninsula, western Prince William Sound, and snow showers for the western Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet through the hills around Anchorage and into the Susitna Valley. It looks like periods of snow will continue for the northern parts of southeast as well. Remember, a winter storm warning is in effect for Juneau. And as we go through Sunday, rain mainly for the north and eastern coast. Look for a 976 millibar low there south of Cape Newenham, and the frontal boundary will continue tracking northward into southwestern Alaska with some of the heavier rain still well south and east of Kodiak Island. Still going to be windy out around the south central regions, and some of that wind moving over the Alaska range will make it blustery through the passes. It looks like snow will continue for the eastern parts of Norton Sound, the lower Yukon Valley. Cold starts to take a break a little bit on Sunday. It will still be cold, but the conditions setting up the really big chill for the wind right now that we're talking about, down to 55 below for the advisories as we head through tonight and tomorrow. That should take a break as we get into Sunday. And looking further west, that next wave of low pressure still hangs west and south of the Aleutians at 977 millibars, with the current wave kind of stuck across the central and eastern chain at 973 on Sunday. Here's a look at temperatures today. Yes, it was cold across the southern Yukon, anywhere from 15 to about 20 below. Is 22 below today in Northway, southeast in the 20s and 30s. Sitka, one of the warmer spots at 35. Same goes for areas south from Craig to Klawock, around Ketchikan and Annette, 20s and 30s there. Hyder was 14, 23 around Juneau, 15 in Haines, and again a little bit on the chilly side there for Haines and Skagway. Teens and 20s for parts of Prince William Sound. Cordova made it up to 36, even warmer out around Montague Island, 34 in Homer, 24 in Kenai, and 19 in Anchorage with 14 around Talkeetna. Golcana rated only 8 below today, 19 above around Rainy Pass. It was 26 in Healy, 14 below in Fairbanks, 15 below in Eagle, and 26 below for Fort Yukon. Arctic Village was 33 below today, 27 below around Anaktuvuk Pass. It was anywhere from 30 to about 35 below for most of the North Slope, with 26 below in Kaktovik, 5 above for Kivalina, 3 above in Shishmaref, and 23 for our friends watching in Nome today. Unalakleet was in the teens, 3 for Grayling, 11 in McGrath. They're on the plus side of 0 today, 21 in Bethel, and 27 around Nunivak Island. For Bristol Bay, we saw temps above freezing, and that trend continued all the way into the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint saw 37. Cold Bay and False Pass also in the mid-30s. 41 for Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, and the central chain in the lower 30s with Shemya showing 28, and the Pribilofs in the 30s as well. Southeast tonight drops into the teens and 20s, south central in the 20s and 30s. The interior from 5 to 15 below. Fort Yukon and Arctic Village, some of the colder spots well below 30 below, 25 below or so for most of the North Slope. The Seward Peninsula in the teens, single digits for Kotzebue Sound, southwestern Alaska in the 20s and 30s a little bit further south of King Salmon. Look for most of the Alaska Peninsula to see temps just shy of 40. And for the central and western chain, lower 30s there, 35 in St. Paul, 36 tomorrow. Teens and 20s for south central and most of the middle Tanana Valley. Southeast in the lower to mid 30s. And the North Slope probably looking at 5 to 10 below for temperatures. Again, wind chill values could be considerably colder. Now the flying weather looks like IFR conditions all the way from Cook Inlet and the Barren Islands from the north to eastern Gulf Coast. Again, a lot of that doing to precipitation and the frontal boundary moving into southeast. Look for MVFR conditions across the southwestern coast into the Bering Strait and developing areas of IFR ahead of the next wave for the western islands. Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass at this point look to be VFR. Not too bad for flying tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass start at IFR through your daytime tomorrow. Rainy Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions developing there, and for Windy Pass throughout your day. Isabel Pass starting at MVFR, slowly improving throughout the day. Metasta Pass looks like it holds at marginal conditions through most of your day. Tanita Pass heading for VFR on your Saturday. Portage Pass will start at IFR, and again there's going to be snow and blowing snow on the western side too, so prepare for some tricky conditions if you're trying to get through there. Chilkoot and White Pass looking for marginal conditions through most of the day, and again there will be periods of heavy snow in the region. The surface freezing line is still hovering right along the southeastern outer coastline and then dropping over Cook Inlet out through Nunivak Island and way out across the west. Any warm air aloft is pushed well to the south at this point. Icing potential rates anywhere from about 3,000 to 4,000 feet across southwestern Alaska and into the western Gulf. We've got a patch of icing potential north of Chilkoot and White Pass and also across the AKwx Valley above 5,000 feet. Excuse me. The jet stream has several waves across the western Bering Sea, one of those kicking out 150-knot winds, and also across southwestern Alaska. A major trough across the Gulf of Alaska right now, rating winds up to 110 knots coming in from the south and west. 9,000 feet, you see the broad southerly flow. It's going to stay in this pattern now, it looks like, for several days, maybe well into next week. It looks like storm conditions and strong areas of low pressure and a pretty stable circulation out west with southerly flow across the Gulf and most of the interior. Look for wind speeds at this level from about 15 to as strong as 40 knots in southwestern Alaska at 3,000 feet. Wind speeds from 15 to 20 knots across southeast, 20 to 25 knots across the lower and middle Yukon Valley. Across the North Slope, 25 knots from the south and east, and then you see our more active area of weather across the southern Bering. And the turbulence potential looks a little bit stronger across the south and west, below 4,000 feet. Isolated severe certainly possible there with low pressure in place across Bristol Bay. Across the central chain below 4,000 feet, and then with the incoming wave of low pressure to southeast, plan for at least a little bit of chop, some of that rating occasional moderate there below 5,000 feet, and also across the North Slope with some gusty winds present. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with the rest of your marine weather and an update on the sea ice edge in just a bit. Stay tuned.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hangar Flying. If you were able to tune in on Monday, our guest was Representative Shelley Hughes. Shelley represents Palmer. She's the leader of a legislative task force about unmanned aircraft or drones, and she had a very important message to share with you all about drones. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and you need to really pay attention if you had got a drone under your Christmas tree today or last night or whatever, because there's some very important safety considerations. Shelley, welcome back.
Merry Christmas and happy holidays.
Thank you.
To you and to all the listeners out there. And there are probably some excited young people today that have drones and going to be testing them outside. And so I appreciate the fact that you've welcomed me here to give some important guidelines to the Alaskans.
Some of those safety ideas.
These guidelines can be found in the booklet we've put together. It's at alaskadrones.org. Wonderful, friendly, user-friendly illustrations. All ages would get something out of looking at this. So if you're a parent who purchased a drone, please look at it. What retailers also have these postcard or bookmarks available with the website. Those safety guidelines include staying under 400 feet, so as not to interfere with a manned aircraft. Stay away from airports, and if you're going to be in the vicinity of an airport, you need to get permission and contact the local airport. And I would say in the summertime, be aware that lakes become airports for float planes, as well as stay away from crowds, stay away from traffic, roadways. We don't want a distraction to cause an accident on a roadway. And those are the basics. The booklet will have more details on that, and so rather than trying to remember all those, I really encourage people to go to the alaskadrones.org website, download the booklet, go through it yourself or with the member in your family who's going to be flying one. It's really important. We don't want anyone on the ground or someone in the air in a manned aircraft to be injured or something worse. And so I just urge Alaskans, we're a leader in the state as far as putting this out and taking such a proactive public education effort. And so I'm happy that my legislative task force saw this as a priority, because hopefully we can keep Alaska safe and not have an incident.
Shelley, let's talk. We've got just about 3 minutes left, but let's talk about your legislative task force. How did you get started? What have you been concentrating on? And talk just a little bit about that.
Well, thank you for that question, because in your earlier program I mentioned that a couple constituents came to me concerned about drones. They were worried about spying and things, because at that time, when we heard the word drone, we thought of a weaponized military drone. Now we have smaller drones, and they're being used for industry purposes and also recreational purposes. And by the way, if any of your listeners are in business and are thinking about using a drone for some aspect of their business, they have to contact FAA and be certified, get a certificate of authorization. Recreational users don't need that, but you all need to stay tuned, because possibly by the end of this month, in December, the FAA secretary will be requiring that drone users register their drones. There will be no cost, so stay tuned, because we need to be able to identify these. And part of that is not just because of the safety aspect, but also the privacy aspect. Law enforcement has come to us and is concerned about how to handle it if imagine a drone flying over your shoulder and you're standing at the ATM putting in your PIN, or you're at your mailbox collecting your mail. We've heard stories like this, so law enforcement needs a way to be able to figure out who the drone belongs to. So stay tuned about that FAA registration possibility.
Now, there is one thing we probably should remind our audience. I think you mentioned it last time, but there is no open season on drones. They're not
That's
fair
right.
game. You can't shoot them down. So.
No, in fact, that's the most frequent questions that is asked of me. But no, you cannot. They're aircraft. And we have to realize, although some of these may be under $100 in the hobby store, they can be, if they're a commercial user, they can be up to $100,000, and from the ground they can look the same. So it's someone else's property. If they are hovering and over your private property, and you feel like your privacy is being invaded, that's when you call your local law enforcement.
Shelley, thank you for being on the program tonight, and thank you for sharing the safety thoughts. Thank you for being a leader in the advancement of the UAS technology and the safety of UAS. And I hope you have a Merry Christmas.
And thank you, Jay. It's actually an exciting opportunity for Alaska. There are some really good uses. These are tools, and operators just need to know and follow the rules.
Yes, indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. I hope you've had a great Christmas. And please, please take heed of what Representative Hughes has said. You can have fun with these drones. They're great. They're a lot of fun, but they also can be very dangerous. They can be dangerous to you. They can be dangerous to other people. Use them responsibly. Enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, fly safe.
With recent cold weather, it should be no surprise that ice is filling in the northern parts of the Cook Inlet. Across some of the foreland areas there, you still see lower concentrations from about 80 down to 20% there north of Kenai. If you look at a wider view across the western parts of the viewing area, as well as the west coast itself, sea ice continues to fill in from north to south, and now south of St. Lawrence Island down toward Nunivak Island. Coastal areas in southwestern Alaska still seeing minimal amounts of ice, but again, with recent cold weather, and as long as the winds stay up, we're not going to see a huge fast advance of that. But once the winds shut off, if they do, we'll see a very different story. Looking in southeasterly winds are picking up there as well, looking for 30 to 40 knots in the southern inner channels with higher gusts up toward the Lynn Canal. Southeasterlies at 15 knots. An onshore flow south of Cross Sound all the way down toward the Dixon entrance, 25 to 30 knots there with seas up toward 15 to 17 feet. A south and southeasterly flow across the outside on Sunday, 20 to 25 knots. That improves over tomorrow. Northerlies across the Lynn Canal, and we maintain southeasterlies across the southern inner channels. That's down to 20 knots, so with a 4-foot sea on Sunday again, and playing for snow. Southeasterlies across the western Gulf, 25 to 35 knots coming into Kodiak Island. Northeasterlies coming across the northern and southern parts of Cook Inlet. Easterlies west of the Barren Islands at 30 knots, also looking for 30 knots inside of Prince William Sound with a 6-foot sea. That should improve a little bit on Sunday, down to 25 knots. Southeasterlies 25 to 30 across the north and western Gulf. Southerlies east of Kodiak Island, and also easterlies across Shelikof Strait, 25 knots there with a 6-foot sea. 20 knots continues to flow out of the Matanuska and Susitna valleys on Sunday with ice in the north and 6-foot sea south of Cowgan Island. Across the Alaska Peninsula, stronger easterly winds inside of Bristol Bay at 40 knots with a 9-foot sea. Westerlies oppose that just to the south. South and westerly winds coming through the North Pacific, 35 to 45 knots ahead of that next wave of weather. Looking for 25 knots south of Sandpoint and King Cove. That diminishes to 15-foot seas there as we get to Sunday. A southerly flow from Castle Cape to Chignik, 30 knots with an 18-foot sea, and easterlies inside of Bristol Bay with a 5-foot sea there on Sunday. For the Aleutians, strong westerlies will stay pretty much south of the Aleutian chain, except for areas north of Nikolsky to Unalaska, 45 knots there on either side of the island, 23 to 24-foot seas expected. There to the west, the seas diminish a little bit as you get into more of an east and southeasterly flow. That's at 30 knots with an 11 to 12-foot seas in the west. By Sunday, the winds start to pick up again from Kiska eastward toward Adak, 40 knots there from Kiska to Adak, and then north of that, you're looking at 25 knots coming in from the north, and west and northwesterly winds 30 to 45 knots with 23 to about 19-foot seas the further west you go on Sunday. Across the west coast, northeasterlies holding around 20 to 40 knots at their strongest. The 40-knot winds again coming off the continent of the Kuskokwim Bay, 40 knots with a 13-foot sea there for Saturday, with northerlies around the Pribilofs at 30 knots with a 15-foot sea. That improves as we get into Sunday. Same goes for areas around the Kuskokwim Bay, and north of that, northeasterlies 30 to 35 knots over the ice around St. Lawrence Island. Across the North Slope, easterlies all across the entire region, 20 to 30 knots on Saturday. That should improve a little bit around Wainwright to Point Lay with a westerly flow at 10 knots. Northerlies coming down from Cape Lisburne into Kotzebue Sound, and southeasterlies pick up from Prudhoe Bay toward Kaktovik. That's at 25 to 30 knots on Sunday. Now, recapping tonight's weather, there's going to be snow in southeastern Alaska, winter storm warnings and advisories for many areas, including the capital city, under a winter storm warning that'll take you well into tomorrow, expecting anywhere from about 5 to 10 inches of snow there, and including the Haines region. Around Hyder, anywhere from 10 to 15 inches of snow, and the Girdwood region looking at 13 to 16 inches of snow on top of some gusty easterly winds up to 40 knots or so, 40 miles per hour. Look for snow and blowing snow around Norton Sound and parts of the southern Seward Peninsula, including Nome there. Winter storm warnings for you. And out across the west, low pressure continues to hold across the southern Bering Sea. That will continue to sit and spin through the rest of the weekend. As we get into Sunday, you can see another wave of rain and moisture moving northward. That means mainly snow showers for south central and a much wetter weather pattern for Prince William Sound and the eastern Kenai Peninsula. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. Merry Christmas.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
If you're a rural Alaskan resident, consider applying for a seat on one of the Federal Subsistence Regional Advisory Councils by Friday, January 29, 2016. Applicants who have knowledge of the regional subsistence uses, customs, and traditions are needed. Council meetings serve as a forum for regional public involvement in subsistence management. Information at 1-800-478-1456 or email subsistence@fws.gov.